This is an interview of Carrie Wilson, or Bill Lattin, conducted by Colin Capurso on June 12, 2025. Bill Lattin is a lifelong resident of Orleans County, New York, and has played a central role in preserving and interpreting the region's history. He has served as the Orleans County historian and was previously the director/curator of the Cobblestone Society for 40 years, retiring in 2010. In addition to his work as a historian, Lattin has dedicated much of his life to antiquing, collection, exhibit curation, and the arts. Part of a family with deep roots in local historical preservation, Bill represents generations of the Lattin family, playing a key role in safeguarding the heritage of the hamlet of Childs and the broader Orleans County area. His father, Cary Lattin, was instrumental in founding the Cobblestone Museum in the 1960s, and Bill continued that legacy with a lifelong commitment to education, community engagement, and historical storytelling. Through his decades of work, Bill has become a vital steward of local memory, helping to shape how Orleans County understands and values its past. Into our questions. What can you tell me about your childhood and early life in this town?
Well, I was born in 1944, grew up on my family's farm on Gaines Basin Road. My first remembrance of any schooling was at Martha Moore's preschool. She held us preschool in her home on the corner of South Clinton and Beaver Street in Albion. And then the next year I started kindergarten at the Albion Grammar School and graduated in the class of 1963 from Albion High School.
Very nice.
I remember as a child, my father wasn't very progressive as a farmer, and so I sort of can say I saw the tail end of late 19th century and early 20th century farming. My father was the last farmer to use a self-binder and then have the wheat thrashed with a thrashing machine. He was the last one to do that. Everybody else in the area had gone to using a combine. As far as entertainment, I wasn't the kind of a kid that was interested in sports, but I remember as a pastime, I was always drawing. And here's a sample of some of my drawings. I guess I had put these together in this roll to preserve them. I took this out of a part of a roll of drawings that I'd made when I was a kid. I think these drawings go back to the 1950s. The one way over here by my right hand is a drawing of a house that was torn down on South Clinton Street. And I recall seeing this house when I attended Martha Moore's preschool, which would have been in the late 1940s.
Similar to what you were saying with your father, being one of the last people kind of farming, so to speak, what kind of role did your family, more specifically your father, play in your interest with local history and historical preservation?
Well, I think I certainly get much of my appreciation for collecting and antiques and aesthetics through my parents. My father in particular had a great appreciation for handmade objects from the 19th century. One of his prized possessions, which I still have, is an heirloom, a family sideboard that was acquired by my great-great-great-grandfather in the 1830s. My parents collected antiques. They especially liked things from the 19th century. And my father certainly had an appreciation for historic architecture and was annoyed when he saw things happen to historic buildings. Of course, this is back in the 50s before there was a real cognizance of architectural preservation.
And in a similar realm, were there any moments or perhaps experiences that sparked your passion for history throughout your life?
I can't think of anything really in particular. The town of Gaines here celebrated a sesquicentennial in 1959. And my father encouraged me to build a float for the sesquicentennial parade. Well, on our farm we had an old building that had all kinds of stuff in it. My grandfather had used it as a shop to repair farm machinery, and in the shop there was a forge and an anvil. And so my father encouraged me to put together a float that would demonstrate a blacksmith shop. And with a neighbor boy, a friend of mine, Jack Miles, the two of us pretended to be blacksmiths on this float during the sesquicentennial parade, 1959. We had the forge going, and we're hammering on the anvil, hot iron during the parade. And as I recall, we won first prize in this, having this float in the parade for 1959. So that was certainly one thing that sticks out in my mind, and it really, I think, is something that really kind of instilled in me, you know, the activity that was necessary for telling history and preserving it.
Definitely, especially that kind of lived experience
Yeah.
going through it. That's amazing. You mentioned that you graduated high school in 1963. What'd you do after you graduated high school, such
Well,
as college and all that?
Yeah, I always had this interest in drawing, as I showed the drawings I did from the 1950s. So I knew I didn't want to be a farmer. So I went to State University College at Buffalo for art education. And it was a great experience. I took 5 years to get through a 4-year program, because along about the 3rd year I thought, why am I taking so many courses? I'm enjoying these courses I'm taking. I'd like to spend more time doing artwork. And so I kind of slacked off. So it was, I spent 5 years getting the bachelor's degree. And it was fine experience. I really wasn't ready to go out and start teaching, and I knew it was something that I didn't really want to do for 40 years.
And so in your past, you were once a teacher. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
The first year that I taught was in the fall of 1968 at the Wise Junior High School, Medina. And then the next year, a job opened up in Albion. So then I taught art at Albion High School from the fall of 1969 through 1978. So 10 years of teaching was more than enough. But it was art and mechanical drawing. The first couple of years that I taught in Albion, I had junior high. But it was only a couple of sections of junior high, and nowhere near as many kids in a class as I had in Medina. So it was a better experience. I enjoyed working really with high school kids, and I think the best classes I ever had were oddly in mechanical drawing.
Do you have any interesting memories or anecdotes about any particular students that might have done something or other things while you were at the school?
Oh yeah, well, there's not time enough to go into details necessarily, but I'd be fired now probably for some of the things that I did. I recall there was a student that would dash into my room between class changeover. He wasn't my student, but he would get in the room to talk to a friend of his who had art with me, and then the next period was mechanical drawing. So that boy never left the room, but his friend would dash in, and I'd shoo him out, and sometimes I didn't see him there until the bell rang, then I'd have to write him a pass to get the where he needed to go. Well, he wasn't my kid, so I was annoyed by it, and there was a big strapping high school senior there, football player, and he observed what was going on. And he would occasionally say to me, well, you want me to get him for you? And I'd say, no, I'll take care of it. Well, one day, in a weak moment, when this little kid was in my room, didn't belong there, Mike says to me, I'll get him for you. And in a weak moment, I said, okay. Well, little did I know what was going to happen. This big strapping kid grabbed this smaller kid, dragged him out in the hall, turned him upside down, and had a leg in each hand, holding the kid upside down. And then we walked over to the third floor stairwell and lifted him up over the railing into the stairwell. And he says with a big grin on his face, shall I let him go? I said, get that kid over this railing immediately. Uprighted the kid, red-faced, he ran down that back stairway, and I never saw him in my hallway again.
Definitely put him in his place.
Oh, bad judgment on my part. I never heard anything more about it.
I can imagine.
Be arrested today, probably.
More than likely. One of the last questions I had for your personal background, early influences, is you live on Gaines Basin Road in a very old cobblestone house. What can you tell me about the history of that house?
The house was built in 1842 by Brigadier and Lavina Bullard. Mrs. Bullard was an aunt to Cyrus Witherell, who was a local cobblestone mason. And the legend is that the Bullard's 12-year-old son took the team of oxen to the lake and picked up all the cobblestones, lake-washed stones, that are used on the front of the house. The rest of the house was made with glaciated stone, so the walls are not anywhere near as pretty as the front of the house.
Gotcha. What about your family living there throughout the years?
My great-grandfather bought the house farm, 75-acre farm originally, from the Bullard estate in 1885, and moved there. My great-grandmother died about that period of time, so Phoebe Anderson Lattin never lived there, but Bartlett M. Lattin and his children lived in the house. My great-grandfather had 4 daughters and one son, my grandfather Nahum.
Very nice. Now, with the museum, what do you remember about the museum and its founding? What was the kind of vision that they had at the time when the museum was coming to fruition in 1960?
My father had pretty much retired from farming by the late 1950s. We had a huge barn that was struck by lightning in September 1956, and that burned down. So he really changed his idea about what he was going to be doing. And the former county historian, Joseph Achilles, died in maybe late 1956, and my father was appointed historian in 1957. I remember going to his office, which was located in the basement of the courthouse when I was a kid. So he was involved in local history. He wrote a weekly column, and as I recall, it was maybe sometime in the summer of 1960 that my father told one afternoon. This young man came into his office by the name of Bob Frash. And Bob Frash introduced himself. He was, I believe at the time, a teacher at Holly High School, and he taught history. And he perhaps lived in Hilton and would drive Ridge Road to get to work in Holly. And he noticed cobblestone buildings, cobblestone residences along Ridge Road. Of course, Ridge Road has innumerable cobblestone residences. At any rate, he was aware of the historic cobblestone church at Childs appeared to be abandoned. And what's going to happen to that? And he was trying to get some information from my father about it. My father really didn't know too much about it, but he knew a number of Universalists who were associated with the church, and that they had 1 or 2 services there each season. I remember as a little kid going there on a couple of different occasions with my parents, because it was kind of an event to go to this old church that looked pretty much the way it always had for special church services. So my father, I think, maybe made some calls, and he, much to his surprise, discovered that the church property was going to be listed with a realtor. And so he and Bob Frash then collaborated, and Bob Frash, being from outside of the community, didn't know any of the people. But my father knew all the right people, but it was Bob Frash who had imagination and enthusiasm, and really was kind of the one that energized my father. And so the two of them got their heads together. Bob Frash said, well, he could see this little crossroads community as being a cobblestone center, a museum village. And so as a result, my father talked with a number of Universalists. My father knew the Universalist minister through the Masonic Lodge. He knew Homer Brown, who had been sort of a sexton or caretaker for this property. And so as a result, the minister and Homer Brown, they all knew the people at the convention, New York State Convention of Universalists. And so the property was then taken off of the real estate market, and negotiations then were undertaken to try to get this property turned over to an entity. Well, no such entity existed, so as a result, my father started talking with people, mostly local people here in the community of Childs, this area, to see if there was any interest in establishing a museum to take over and preserve this historic building. So as a result, there were enough people who agreed, and the first initial meeting for what was to become the Cobblestone Society occurred on October 23rd, 1960, and they met in the sanctuary of the Cobblestone Church. My father had put together a list of people who would be willing to serve on a board of trustees, and they talked about a name. They didn't come up with a name at that meeting. I was at that meeting, and they discussed how they were going to organize and a board of trustees and membership and that kind of thing. So my father had sort of served as a committee of one to pull these people together, said they would be willing to serve. He didn't include his own name, and finally somebody in the audience said, well, Carrie Lattin should be on the board of trustees too. So anyways, they ended up with a board of trustees at that initial meeting, and they needed the advisement of an attorney, And Curtis Lyman agreed to be an attorney pro bono for the organization. And so as a result, they then had another meeting, and it was at the Village Inn. And I recall that it was at that meeting that they determined what the name of the organization would be, simply Cobblestone Society.
That's fascinating. Being there and seeing all of that historical change come through and kind of evolve into what it is today. With all of that in mind, what made you want to be part of the Cobblestone Society? And moreover,
Well,
when did you become part of it?
I was there from day one, and with succeeding meetings, they determined what the membership would be, and so they had a charter membership. So if you joined the society within a certain amount of time, you were considered a charter member, and they had a student chartership membership. So I was one of the charter members in the student category, along with Gail Thompson Johnson. So Gail and I are long time, go way back, we're charter members.
And since you've seen the museum ever since its inception, when it first came to be, how has it changed over the years, both physically, how its mission has maybe changed, or anything that you can recall?
Well, going back to those early days, it was perhaps sometime in late 1960 or early 1961, my father got a call from Charlie Thompson, Gail Johnson's father, and Charlie said, there's going to be a meeting, they want to sell the schoolhouse. So Charlie indicated to my father, really, you're getting organized, you ought to have the schoolhouse to go along with the church. So there was a meeting, it was up in the, what's now the middle school auditorium, and they determined at that point that the school, they were going to table any decision about the school until the Cobblestone Society really got itself better organized. So I think they tabled it maybe for 6 months, and ultimately the Cobblestone Society ended up with the real property that they first owned was the schoolhouse, which cost in legal fees $129 to get this transferred from Old District Number 5 to the newly formed museum. It took longer to untangle all the red tape, and so to speak, through the New York State Convention of Universalists to fully acquire the church. They knew they were going to get it all along, but I think it took about 3 years, and the church building cost $500, again, to take care of legal fees and all the entanglements that came with wills from the past and money and so on.
Very nice. Now, you mentioned, since you've been around since the beginning of the Cobblestone Museum, that you've met some of the founders, especially individuals such as Gail. How well did you know some of them, and how they influenced your life? Any stories that you might be able to tell about them?
After this organization got started immediately, my father tried to think who around would be a person with money, an angel that could come on board. And finally, my father thought of an old-time friend that he knew in high school that he hadn't seen in years, but he knew that he was well-to-do. And so my father contacted John D. Brush, who was the owner of the Century Safe Company in Rochester. Now, Brush had been, before he got into manufacturing safes, he had been gone to St. Lawrence University Theological School and had become a Universalist minister. He was only in the ministry for a very short period of time, didn't like it, and then he and his brother-in-law went into the safe manufacturing business. Anyways, very well-to-do. My father hadn't had any contact with him in years, but my father wrote him a letter. and asked him if he would be interested in coming on board to help preserve the old Universalist church. A week or so went by, and one day John Brush appeared in my father's office, much to my father's surprise, and immediately said, "I'm with you. Oh, and by the way, you remember that dinghy we had when we were back in high school? You said sell the dinghy. I got $30 for it. Here's the money that I never gave to you." But anyways, John Brush was a real asset to helping a fledgling group get off the ground. And of course, in the lobby of the church, there is a plaque honoring John D. Brush. And that plaque was put up because he was the one who was responsible for paying for having the tower restored to the cobblestone church, and that there's a plaque on the other side of the lobby that indicates he paid for that as a memorial to his mother, Eva M. Brush.
That's amazing. And now, as part of the museum, you served as a director for 40 years and retired in 2010. What were some of the biggest goals or priorities when you became the director of the museum?
I recall one day, Bob Frash appeared in my art room at the school, after school. He must have said, "Can I come and talk with you?" And I said, "Yeah, I come at 2:30 or something," because it must have been a Friday, because the board of directors in those early years, and for quite a few years actually, met on Friday afternoons at 4 o'clock. So Bob Frash came in. This would have been in maybe about 1970. And he said to me, I think you ought to be the curator for the museum." By 1970, they had put in a cement floor in the basement of the church and were beginning to collect things. And because I was an art teacher and was interested in pulling things together, so to speak, and had artistic ability, they thought that I would be the logical one to be an exhibit designer. It was what they really need. It was kind of a hodgepodge of stuff, and they needed somebody to help organize it and make these antique artifacts that they had there more attractive and educational, to make sense out of it, so that you didn't have a hat pin next to a plow. You get things together and make it look attractive.
And now you've contributed to many different exhibits and other things relating to curating these types of things that we have at the museum. Can you share a project, an exhibit, or an event that you're especially proud of that you helped build while you were here?
It was in 1975 that the Cobblestone Museum inherited, through bequest of Nellie Vag, her will, the blacksmith shop. And there were some volunteers that went in and cleaned and helped straighten it up, because it had been left just the way Joseph Vag had got through using it, pretty much. And it got it cleaned up. So in the summer of 1976, people came to the museum to see the cobblestone church and the school, and but nobody went over to the blacksmith shop. I'd say, well, you'd like to see the blacksmith shop? Nobody really went over. As I recall, maybe a couple different visitors went over there during the summer of 1976. So I thought, well, if there was something else over at 98 for people to go see, it might be more encouraging for people to bother to cross the road. Well, I really consider myself an architectural preservationist, obviously doing drawings of buildings when I was a kid. Anyway, I was aware of a derelict building in Medina. I knew the man who owned it, Erling Main, who ran the lumber yard. in Medina, where the building was located. And Curtis Lyman had said there's CETA grants that you could get to maybe move a building like that. So anyways, I went to see Erling Maine and asked him if he would be willing to give us the building, which is now our print shop, if we could get a CETA grant for it. And Erling said, well, yeah, I could do that. It was just like that. So we were in business. And we got the CETA grant. It was, fortunately, it was because of payroll. The Albion school system, I was friends with the superintendent, agreed to take care of the payroll. So they handled the grant. And anyways, we cleared the lot that had come, a small lot with the blacksmith shop, cleared the lot and got the building moved there in 1977. The print shop was moved there, and we had to tear off a part of the roof so it would come under the wires. Keeler Construction Company agreed to put it on a flatbed once it was ready to be moved from Medina down here. So I had success with that. And then also recognizing the urgency of doing something with the old Kendall Town Hall, I again talked with the superintendent. That was Douglas Houck at the time. And he said, yeah, go for it. So I saw Mike Paduchek, who was the supervisor of the town of Kendall. And it was noised about that the fire department in Kendall wanted to burn the old town hall down for a practice fire. They'd build a new town hall, didn't need this building any longer. Well, Paduchek had put them off. And so when I approached Mike Paduchek and asked him would there be any way would the town of Kendall give us the old town hall, his immediate reply, as I recall, was, whoa, you'd be doing me a real favor if you could get that out of there. So we got it out of there, so to speak. We started on May Day, and we had all the pieces disassembled and trucked here by Pete Roth, who was a neighbor here at the museum, ran a trucking business. He had a flatbed, got all the pieces here by the 1st of July, and miraculously got the building put back together and painted on the outside by the end of October. I'm telling you, ignorance is bliss. I would never take on a project like that because pieces of wood got broken. I had 3 or 4 unskilled, untrained kids in their early 20s. Of course, that was the purpose of CETA, was to give people training to put this building back together. So we had to buy supplies in some cases to make the building more secure. But miraculously, we got it put back together. And then the following year, we worked on the interior. Again, I had 2 CETA workers that season to work on the interior, got up the drywall and the building finished on the inside. And then it was dedicated with a grand parade on June 1st, 1980. And it pulled together from the 1960s. People started dumping on the museum agricultural equipment. Well, there was no place to put it. Smaller things eventually got put in the basement of the cobblestone church, but then there were bigger pieces of farm tools from the 19th century. Charlie Thompson said, well, I got room in my barn. Curtis Murray, he had a big barn. Well, I can take some stuff in my barn as things were given, both men on the Board of Trustees. My father had barn space, so we had stuff scattered in different buildings, didn't know what we had. So by getting that building here, it allowed us to pull this collection together and to display it and to deaccession duplicates. So that project, I suppose in some ways it's visual storage. We've tried to, make it thematic in some areas, but at least it saved the stuff. I've never been opposed to having just a repository. Well, then the other building over there, the harness shop, was a little building up in Gaines, and it was located next to the Chatterbox restaurant, which is no longer there. Rose Wells owned the little building and ran the Chatterbox restaurant. And I would frequently go to the Chatterbox, sometimes for lunch, and I'd say to her, "Why don't you give the museum that little building?" And she'd, "Get out of here, I'm never going to give that building to you." Well, after several years of banting, I let it go. And one day I went in for lunch and Rose says, "Well, when are you coming to get the building?" I said, "What?" She said, "Well, I'm going to put this place up for sale. When are you coming to get the building?" I've got to get it out of here in 2 weeks. So Marcia Hart, who was a member of the Board of Trustees at the time, her cousin was Lyman Rice, and he sold mobile homes. So Marcia and I went to see Lyman Rice, and he agreed to load it on a flatbed once we got the building ready. So we were able to move that here, because getting the printing equipment out of the basement of the church, getting some architectural or getting some agricultural things out of the church, and getting the harness shop stuff out of the basement of the church, opened up the basement of the church, so we had then space for people for receptions and meetings, which we just didn't have at that period of time. So anyways, the town of Gaines assisted in getting the building moved down the road on the flatbed, and that's kind of an interesting story in itself, that we got the building all ready to come, and I didn't have a permit to move it. And so I thought, well, I guess I better do something about this. So I called the sheriff, Dave Green, and I said, "We've got a building we want to move down to Childs from Gaines tomorrow. I think it would be good to have a police escort." "Well, what time do you want me to be there?" So he came, and I knew we were over height, and I didn't want to have to tear off that curved fake front on the building. So I got a long stick and cut a V shape in it so I could push up a couple of telephone wires as I rode on this flatbed down the road to get it in here next to the print shop and the harness shop. So really, that project, to me, it's like a beautiful painting. Those 3 buildings, which otherwise, at this point in time, would have been destroyed.
Yeah.
And when our charter, provisional charter, was written by Curtis Lyman, it included to say that the museum was established to preserve all forms of regional art and architecture, not just cobblestone things. So we in essence represent a regional museum, a local history museum, and are kind of, in a way, I think, is seen as a kind of county museum. Definitely. Because there are other historical museums in the county, but I mean, we have 10 buildings now.
Yeah, you seem to have a knack for acquiring buildings, apparently.
Well, ask and ye shall receive. I wasn't good at raising money. I think I'm more of a materialist than I am an idealist. And so I was, good at getting artifacts and acquiring buildings. And after 40 years, I could see that we were losing ground as far as membership and finances and so on. So at this point in time, I'm so pleased that Doug Farley came on, because he's doing exactly what I felt needed doing when I retired, And it didn't happen for several years until he came on board. But we all have abilities for different things. And at this point, what we have here is certainly a well-rounded collection of historic buildings, and at this point, now we need to make the best use of them,
Definitely.
which I had no interest in doing. I'm only interested in the repository.
As a director, would you argue that financials were some of the biggest challenges?
It was always a challenge. I tried several different people to get money when we needed money to do restoration work at the Farmers Hall in 1978, and I couldn't get anywhere. I went to see the head of the Lipton Company, and I thought, well, maybe we could get some money out. And several people said, well, go, see the manager at Lipton. So I went to see him. And when I suggested something about, well, it could, if the gift was significant enough, it could include a naming right. I barely got the words out of my mouth, and he says, oh, no. Well, now in hindsight, that was 1978. He knew Lipton's was going to be moving. Nobody else knew. And by 1980, Lipton's was gone.
Interesting. And you've, as I've mentioned before, curate and gather lots of artifacts for these exhibits. Some of them were just left in the basement or across the county in different barns. But altogether, how did you go about acquiring those kinds of artifacts and building the collections inside the museum, such as the Morning Art Gallery that you've curated?
Well, with the morning art stuff that's now an exhibit over at the Brick House, that's just something I did on my own. I started collecting that kind of thing back in the 60s for my own interest. I had a professor of photography when I was in college. I still correspond with him. He was only 6 years older than me. He was real young at the time, but he was into collecting historic photographs, and showed our class post-mortem pictures, daguerreotype pictures from the mid-19th century. So I thought they were very interesting. And then I began to realize in antiquing, well, there was a lot more to death than just post-mortem pictures. So I then started collecting stuff as I saw that sort of told the story more completely.
Very nice. Now, on top of being the director / curator for a long period of time in the museum, you also served as the county historian. When you were the county historian, what kind of work did that involve, and how did it complement your role at the museum?
The only thing that I was asked to do when I was appointed historian, which began on January 1st, 1979. See, I'd already been the museum curator, as they first called it, beginning in January 1971. And I had had success with moving the print shop in the Farmers Hall. So the Board of Supervisors recognized that I had some interest in local history. It was Pete Roth, a neighbor over here. He was the vice chairman of the Republican Party, and this position opened up for county historian. And he came to me and he said, why don't you apply for that? And I said, I don't know as I can do that. And he said, well, do it as a favor for me. Well, he'd done the museum all kinds of favors, so I felt obligated. They had a couple of other people that were interested in the job, but anyways, I was appointed the historian to begin in 1979. The only thing that they said to me that they wanted me to do was to do a weekly column. So that worked out oftentimes to the benefit of the museum, because I could write about stuff and sometimes wrote about events that were going to be here, putting a historical, twist on it, or finding stuff that would relate to the museum. And so there are a lot of my columns that related to the museum. Nobody ever complained that I did a lot relating to the museum, but it was all history. My column was known as "Be Thinking of Old Orleans," and I did that column for 1979 through 2014.
Spanned quite a few decades, huh?
Yeah, I wasn't, and I certainly wasn't an A-plus student in English.
Maybe through your columns or even just as county historian, what are some of the most interesting stories or perhaps discoveries that you've made or found out about the county's history or even a specific location?
Oh, I don't know. There's just so much here that it's amazing the number of people that is far-reaching in the county. There's obvious ones like Charles Howard, world famous Santa Claus, so to speak. Going back to the 19th century, one of our famous people is certainly George Pullman, involved with the Universalist Church here, and then later built the Pullman Church in Albion. There are just so many people that are of national importance that came out of Orleans County. Henry Porter worked for Walt Disney and is considered to be the father of Donald Duck. He's buried in Mount Albion Cemetery. And then there are people who did things that their names are lesser known. Elizabeth Harriet Denial. She was a professor of art history, first woman professor at the University of Rochester in 1902. And she spearheaded the establishment of Memorial Art Gallery in Rochester. She was an author, wrote about Nicholas Poussin, 18th century painter. Reverend Dr. Charles Vail, minister at the Universalist Church in Albion, early 20th century, spearheaded the establishment of the National Socialist Party. There are all these people that did things that are, way beyond the scope of Orleans County.
And it truly goes to show that interconnectedness of not only the world, but just the United States as a whole. All these big notable figures, whether they come in through for a day or so, they still have some significance out here. It's amazing that you've been able to find those.
So there are many.
And as county historian, how did you see the role in preserving community and the identity relating to history, or kind of uplifting the community facilitated through history, perhaps?
Well, one thing is, especially through the museum, was through events. I started the idea of doing cemetery tours. I think the first cemetery here in Orleans County, that is, the first cemetery tour I did was at Mount Albion, and that was in 1994. And I advertised it in my column, and anyways, much to my surprise, about 300 people showed up for this tour. It's a good thing I had a bullhorn. The village historian at the time, before the tour, said to me, "Well, what are you doing that for?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I go out to the cemetery and I see people walking and jogging, and the coach for as the team go out and run, a track team. I just thought they might like to know something about the monuments they're running by." Well, then after the village historian found out how many people came on the tour, well, gee, if you do another tour, can I help you out? So any way you can get people involved in history and motivated and active in history, I think is important, so they have a better understanding of their environment.
Definitely, that kind of broad appeal for people,
And
whether it be a small thing that captivates them or a larger scale thing.
just the other night on well, it was MSNBC, somebody said, well, all history is local history. Well, yeah, we've heard that any number of times.
Definitely. Alongside, this is a little bit later, beyond county historian, but my grandfather, Al Capurso, was one of the major reasons behind the cobblestone schoolhouse on Gaines Basin Road being preserved. What was your role in that? What did you do to help kind of preserve and revitalize the building?
At the time, Al was president of the Orleans County Historical Association. This probably goes back to maybe 2013 or so. One day I got a call from the code officer in the town of Gaines and asked if I could come to his office for a chat. I went, well, what's he want? So anyways, I hadn't done anything, and the museum hadn't done anything. What's he want? So anyways, his name was Roger Kopus. He wasn't code officer very long. I got to his office. We had a nice chat, and he proceeded to tell me that Jim Panic had been in to get some permits for something, and while he was there, made an inquiry about getting a demolition permit for the cobblestone school at Gaines Basin. Kopus told me, he said, I didn't give him a permit. He just made an inquiry about getting a permit. What do you think about that building? And I said, well, it would need a lot of work. I think it could be restored, but I said, I don't know who's going to take that on. I don't think if he's inquired about a demolition permit, he isn't going to be interested in preserving it. And Kopus says, well, I think the old girl still got some life in her. So I said, well, would you like me to write a letter to Jim Panic and just ask him to, in the letter from behalf of the Cobblestone Society, would you be willing to just put off doing anything with the building for a while? And in the letter, I suggested, because they have Panic's pumpkin patch, I said, Gaines Basin Road's a very busy road. Could that building serve as a background, as kind of a satellite farm market for you? I never heard anything back from, the letter was sent, I never heard anything back from Jim Panic, and I never talked with him about it. Well, the next thing I knew, Al Capurso had contacted, and I told Al about what was going on, and so Al contacted Panic, and being president of the Historical Association, Al was able to, surprisingly, convince the Historical Society to take on the school. They had even talked about disbanding. Wow. And Al spearheaded the preservation of the building. But I'm glad I sent the letter, because I think that did stall Panic from doing anything more about seeking a demolition permit.
Definitely.
So a lot of money has gone into preserving that building.
Yeah,
a lot of money has gone into it. So.
And then additionally, you've been responsible for publishing numerous books throughout your life. Is there anything that you can tell me about them, along with any findings you were able to uncover within them, such as Architecture Destroyed, for example?
Well, I did a series of architectural buildings that had been destroyed in my column as county historian. And so after having a number of these buildings all written up, I suggested to the Board of Trustees, why couldn't we put out a book on that as a money-raising project for the museum? And the board readily agreed to that. The other, well, first, that was done in 1984, and so this last year it was reprinted with additions, again, to benefit the Cobblestone Society. The other thing that I've always been very proud of is the research that I did in pulling together a book entitled Luminaries in the Firmament, which is a guide to stained glass windows in the county. Magnificent specimens of stained glass. You wouldn't think that these treasures of great art would be so many of them in a rural area like this. I suppose they represent a certain amount of permanency for something like that. But anyways, my idea was that these windows should be documented, and stories about them should be preserved. And people look at these windows and they really don't know what they're looking at because there's so much symbolism in a lot of the windows. What does it mean? So these windows were not only meant to be memorials, but they were meant to be instructive. And I truly hope that other communities would pick up on the idea and do documentary photographs of these windows as a way to preserve them. Don't have to necessarily publish a book. I believe in Genesee County, somebody did go out and take pictures of stained glass windows in the churches there. But this is something that really needs to be done because congregations dissolve, buildings get torn down. So these are important community treasures.
It's beautiful. That kind of like bottom-up approach of history, kind of captivating all. When it comes to your philosophy towards history and any reflections you may have towards it, what do you believe is the importance of local history to a community?
Well, like I said, all history is local history. People need to have an understanding of where a community has come from. You have a better idea of what it's all about. And usually there's a reason for something to be the way it is. And in some cases, don't meddle with it.
We've seen that too many times.
Keep your meddling hands off.
Now, what advice would you give to someone who wants to get involved in historical work or perhaps being a curator for a museum, anything in that sort of realm?
Well, you'll never become rich. Because it seemed like with the museum, and it's true to this day, we're always looking for funds. You know, when bright people come on board and can seek grants, that's wonderful, and we've been fortunate to get a lot of grants here. But you need, it's always a struggle for money, it seems, to keep things going.
And with the museum in mind, what do you hope the future holds for the museum? What would you like to see beyond your time?
Well, with what we have at the blacksmith shop and the print shop and even the harness shop there, I could see this becoming more educational than we're doing that now, but I think we could become more of an educational facility. And with the new building that's being planned for out back here,
Visitor Center.
It can take what we have now, which is pretty much a 3-season museum, it can bring it into a year-round, 4-season facility.
That'd be incredible. I hope to see that someday. And then my last question for you, how would you like your contributions to be remembered by the community?
Well, I think that if what we've done over there on Route 98 lasts, I feel that was one of my better contributions. And also, I had to stick my neck out to preserve the brick house next to the church. The planning board in the town again said, that could be torn down. Nobody famous slept there. Well, I don't know how anybody knew whether anybody famous slept there or not. Maybe somebody did. I don't know. But when the property was going to be sold in 1998, the owner was going to sell the store and the brick house, which had a wing on it and a liquor store later added to it. And we said, we don't want to look at gas pumps from the cobblestone church. Nobody could see it from our perspective, so
Yeah.
I had to stir up community interest. We had a meeting over at the Village Inn one night. There 100 people showed up that were against seeing that building torn down. So as a result, we worked out a deal between the seller and the new owner, and everything was placid and agreeable in the end. The Cobblestone Society had to tear off an 1870s wing on the house and the concrete block liquor store to get it back to the original configuration of the house built in the 1830s. So we were able to preserve it, and that's an important building to have here at and it functions so well for a very needed office at this point in time.
Yeah. Well, that is all that I have for you, Bill. Thank you for the interview and for the incredible legacy that you have left behind. We appreciate the time that you've given us today.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you.